Welcome to Business Agility Now, the podcast powered by Scaled Agile. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. This is the place to get advice, stories, and perspectives to help you work differently and build the future. Thanks for listening and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, Andrew, I've been really careful all week to not introduce things as, and welcome to this podcast from SAFe Summit, because last year when I did that, I had podcasts from Summit all the way through March and people got frustrated. But for this content, I feel like it's probably appropriate to say that we're in DC at Summit. So there's been a lot of things this week that have come out, right? Like we're sitting here across from the booth. I can see the new BP. I can see new article structure. Like we've been busy the last few months.
Yeah, it's been a really busy few months. But first of all, thank you, Adam, for making the time for us to have this discussion. And you're right. It is great to point out to our listeners that we're here in DC at the SAFe Summit, because actually there were a whole bunch of things that we were working on as a framework team and more generally across SAI that we finally had the pleasure of announcing as part of my keynote on Tuesday this week. You mentioned a new big picture. I know we're going to go into that, but a whole bunch of other things as well that I was really excited to be able to share with our community.
That's great. So before we do dive into that, I would like to give people the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. I know the last time you were on, it was a panel with Rebecca and with Dean and with yourself. And I feel like Dean and Rebecca were very open and maybe didn't leave you a lot of time to do the Andrew introduction. So I do want to take the time for people to get to know the chief methodologist, Andrew Sales, and just kind of how you evolved your career and grew into where you're at now. And the first time you came up on my radar as somebody that, was in our field, I was working with an old colleague of mine who I understand was an old colleague of yours as well. Do you remember working with Troy Plant?
Yes, I do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can tell you a bit about that story as well, actually. That's really where it started. So when I tell the story, Adam, of sort of how my career panned out, I like to look at it through three sort of lenses. And the first lens was when I was working for an education company, Pearson, actually. And that colleague of yours, Troy, that you mentioned, came over and supported us with our agile implementation, moving to a more agile and lean way of working, which evolved quite quickly into SAFe, at least in the department that I was working in. I started, like many people, by taking an implementing SAFe class, became an SPC, and then started to train others inside the organization. And then after some time, I moved to a partner. I joined Rally, and it was great to see the other side of the picture, working inside a partner now, getting to experience and help many different organizations in many different sectors with their SAFe implementation. And then I feel like the third piece of that puzzle came to fruition when I joined Scaled Agile 6 years ago. So getting to see things from an organizational point of view, to see it from a partner perspective, and then finally, of course, being part of Scaled Agile itself. About 2 years in to my Scaled Agile journey, so about 4 years ago, if I remember correctly, was when I had the opportunity to move from an advisor role. We were in the same team at that time, I think, Adam, into the framework team. And of course, a great opportunity to really then be part of the group that are evolving the guidance behind SAFe and contributing to how we think about what the evolution of the framework needs to look like.
I'm curious to ask you and curious to know, so having worked full-time at Pearson, right, so being in an enterprise that was transformed, so moving into that role of consulting, and you kind of mentioned having the opportunity to work on both sides, what were some of the biggest differences that you saw as a consultant that were very different from your time there as an FTE?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a slide in my keynote on Tuesday this week where I put up 3 things that I thought were important for us to always consider, which was the purpose of the work we do, the mental models that describe why these new ways of working work the way they do, and the context of the organization you're applying them. When you work inside an organization for many years, that context is second nature. You know exactly how things are done. You know how to get decisions processed. You know how to move work through the system. When you start moving to more of a consultant role, you're moving quickly from one organization to another. You don't necessarily have that context, that deep understanding. And I think it's always a good reminder for all of us that are working in roles like that to make sure that we take the time to really do our best to understand, sometimes in the limited time we have available, how does one organization differ in terms of context, culture, ways of working from another organization? So in answer to your question, the breadth and the differences that you see compared to, of course, having that single threaded view when you live and breathe a single organization versus the opportunity to visit many. Of course, it comes with huge opportunity. Seeing many different organizations, different industries, different ways of working just helps you develop a broader and I think more empathetic understanding of all the different challenges that exist across all the different industries and organizations. So it gives you a more complete understanding, perhaps, that you don't always have from a single perspective.
Sure. It's a hard balance between this is how we do it here and really seeking to understand why things are done a certain way there. So I think as an FTE, you're always in the headspace of, well, that doesn't work here because we don't do things here that way because, and as a consultant, you're always asking, well, why do you do it that way, right? Can't we change that? And I think when you have the perspective of both sides, and I did as well. I mean, I was an FTE at a company called Laureate Education in Baltimore, and I oversaw their digital transformation. And there was a lot of things that I learned there, having been a consultant first, and then understanding the history of that organization really changed the perspective I had when I went back into consulting, of having more empathy for how organizations operate and some of the different drivers. I think a lot of the times folks in our space are very quick to say, well, leadership, anytime things are hard or challenging. And what they often don't think of is the challenges and incentive structures that are in place for leaders, right? So people in leadership roles are smart. They understand what's right and why we might want to work in this way, but then they also have different drivers. They could have different incentive models. I always refer to the pyramid, where the higher up you get in the organizational pyramid, the greater the cost of taking a risk, because if you fall off that pyramid, well, then it's harder to find your next thing. In some cases, you might not recover. In other cases, you might have to completely relocate your entire family for your next opportunity. So there's a lot of caution that leaders at that level have before they take those risks. And I think for me, going from consulting to FTE back to consulting, that was definitely my biggest aha. And it maybe have a lot more empathy for people in those positions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if I think about my own through as I was putting my keynote slides together, it was exactly those two perspectives that you described that I found sometimes led to some of the challenges that arose with organizations looking to adapt lean agile ways of working. On the one side, like you said, Adam, the leaders have responsibilities outside of just the change. They are running the business. They've got existing functioning processes they need to keep running. They're responsible for the day-to-day activities alongside the change. And on the other side of the equation, we have change agents like ourselves doing our very best to support the organization going through the change. And the perfect scenario that I remember from my days working at Rally is when you have this wonderful meeting of the two. You have yourself coming in as a change agent, and you have people inside the organization with that contextual knowledge, with the understanding of how things really work. And you start to form partnerships. I remember some of the very best training that I got the opportunity to do inside organizations was when I was pairing with someone from the organization. They could speak the language, they could communicate to their peers inside that organization, and I could bring the ideas, the new ways of thinking that perhaps they hadn't yet considered. So the partnership between the change agent and the organization is really the key. And that was one of the key underlying messages that I hope came across that I was sharing in my keynote earlier this week. So I completely agree with your sentiment.
The dynamic that you just described is often what I see as being the most powerful combination for the people in our SPCT community. So for example, if you can have a partner SPCT and an internal SPCT paired together on any change initiative, I mean, that's the golden ticket, because you have the internal folks to understand the social network and the structure and the history, and they can navigate that social structure in a way that a consultant never can. And also you have the consultant with the outside perspective, the outside voice, who doesn't have to worry about saying things that could commit a career-limiting mistake. And just together, it's a really powerful thing. So to kind of diverge from that a bit, I would like to talk a little bit about, kind of our history and our journey, right? Because if you look at the path we've been on since 2013, 2014, when SAFe was brand new and it was the tool of the innovators, to kind of where we're at now, the framework's gone through evolutions and kind of this maturation process that brings us to where we're at today. Could you kind of describe that for folks?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, I was giving some thought to this the other day, and I think there's some real key moments in that evolution that are worth highlighting. I mean, if you think back to the beginning of SAFe, it really was about how do we run programs of work? How do we create teams of teams, agile release trains, and organize them around the work to be done? I think the first evolution, or the first evolution that followed that, was the realization that there was something bigger in terms of coordination, alignment, key conversations what we now think of as lean portfolio management. And that evolution to add that layer to the big picture, to how we think about the framework, suddenly brought the leaders and their responsibilities and accountabilities into the frame. The next big evolution, I think, was when we started to see some organizations taking what we thought was scale in terms of 1 Agile release train, 2 Agile release trains, 120, 250 people, and scaling that to a level beyond perhaps what we could even have imagined at the beginning, starting to coordinate across large solution trains, thousands of practitioners working together to develop cyber-physical devices and systems and solutions. And that evolution was really characterized when we brought in some of the large solution guidance, enterprise solution delivery. I think was the business agility evolution. It came in with version 5. We started realizing that the organizations that were really succeeding with SAFe were the ones that were closing that gap between IT and business. They were realizing that the best cross-functional teams were the ones that had representation from across the whole organization. And suddenly we were starting to see a more holistic and aligned approach to what it really meant to create an organizational level of agility. There's another evolution that I think we're on now, which is the one that we unveiled this week, which still maintains those 3 key aspects of SAFe, but takes us back almost in a way to where our conversation began a few minutes ago. And it was an evolution I described as follows. I think up to now, the mission has been creating a complete body of knowledge. If you want to know, Adam, about lean UX or suppliers or shared services or big data, it's all in the framework. And now what we're seeing as we move through that adoption curve is that organizations want to find a quicker route to the answers to their questions. They want an ease of understanding. They want simplification in terms of getting those answers. And they want the key messages and conversations to be amplified so they don't have to work hard to uncover them. So this next evolution that we revealed this week is really about how do we create a framework that exudes and is optimized for understanding? How does it make the key storylines around lean and agile, around optimizing flow, around accelerating business value, stand out clearer than ever before? But you're absolutely right. We've had these key evolution points throughout our history, and we're going to continue to have them. There'll be evolutions in the future as we continue to think about and research where we need to develop further.
Well, and I mean, there's a lot of opportunities to go deep in certain areas and maybe look at new areas too. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about the future is that there's always opportunities to grow and evolve. And that's been a big part of our history. I think what's really powerful about, I'm sitting here looking at a sign that says enhanced framework articles. I think it's a really powerful thing to give people easier access to more clear and concise information. I think one of the things that we've heard a lot about in the market is when you have a well-intended consultant who's offering guidance and advice, and maybe they've read the articles and maybe they struggle to comprehend it. So when they get into a tough conversation, right, maybe their response is, well, you need to do it because SAFe says. And that's never been the intent, right? We never wanted to dictate to anyone how they must do things, or we never really wanted to dictate SAFe to anybody, right? I often describe the framework as, well, I'm a car guy, right? I love cars. So I often describe it as the Snap-on tool truck. And that's a truck that comes to car dealers and mechanic shops weekly. And you can buy a mechanic's toolkit in there for about $500,000. And if you're a brand new mechanic doing oil changes, you might really want to go buy every tool in that truck, but it's probably in your best interest to just say, okay, right now, today I'm doing oil changes. I need the best tools I can get to do oil changes and really understand how to use them. And I use that metaphor with people to understand the framework and the what and the why, right? So first off, what problems are you trying to solve? And then figure out, one, does SAFe make sense for you today? If you have an agile team and you're running a pilot in a small area, well, it probably doesn't make sense to go through everything in the framework with that one team. It's overly burdensome. You really want to focus on what makes sense for your context today. So even as a single team, there's things in SAFe that are super valuable for you, but you just need to focus on those. Look at the team guidance. Look and really understand how to be effective and understand what's important and how you consider and make decisions. And then as your problems change and as the opportunities evolve, figure out what other tools from the toolbox make sense. As we decide that SAFe makes sense for our context, focus on the core competencies and focus on doing those really well. What scared me in the past was when I would hear clients say things like, I want to mature into large solution. And the question is, well, why? What are you building that makes sense for? I mean, that that level of abstraction is really built for things like we're building satellites, we're building large, complex ERPs. If you're not doing things like that, SAFe doesn't say you have to do large solution. It says you can if your problems warrant that. So what I'm most excited about the enhanced framework articles and the way that they're written and how they're structured is that it's a lot easier for people to read and understand and comprehend so that they can apply to context using their own logic and reason without having to resort to, well, SAFe says.
And actually, when we did the work to begin enhancing the articles, and if people haven't seen one of the enhanced articles, just the way you describe it, Adam, they've been improved to make it easier to understand how to apply the practice. We've reduced the reading level to make them easier to consume, particularly for those that don't have English as a first language. But one point you touched on was around the purpose, the why. And it was interesting as we went through some of these articles, in some of them, the why was really buried. And one of the things that we're trying to do as part of this latest evolution of the framework is remind people that this is a framework. And by definition, the framework is there to bring together a set of integrated practices, but more than anything, it's there to be extended, adapted, applied to solve, as you said, Adam, the problems that people are facing now. So one of the things we're trying to do really clearly in these new articles is, number one, state the purpose, not just the purpose of why we're doing SAFe, but the purpose in terms of what is the purpose of cadence and synchronization? What is the purpose of PI planning? Why is PI planning 2 days? I said on stage the other day, it's not 2 days because there's a lot of things to do. It's 2 days because it's designed to create a feedback mechanism to help organizations create the best plans. And once we start to make this understanding more easier and more accessible, then it gives organizations the tools to really think about, okay, what are the things that we need to adhere to because they work, because they're designed a certain way, and where are the surface areas that we can adapt to fit to our context? And a great example, I think, is a brand new article that we released on feedback. It's in the enhanced format, so very accessible, easy to navigate. Feedback is all over SAFe. System demos, we have it built in to inspect and adapt. It's built into the PI planning process. But the feedback article helps organizations take a step back and really understand at the root cause, why is feedback important? And why do these mechanisms that help you amplify feedback work the way they do? And what does it look like actually just to implement successful feedback systems anywhere in your organization where you need to get closer to your customers, your products, or the systems you're building? So we're trying much harder as the way that we think about communicating the framework to make that why really clear, and also to make the mental model behind the processes even clearer so organizations feel they have the confidence to then think about how we're going to apply that. And as you said, Adam, consultants that are working with the framework understand where do the proven practices end and where does the ability to really customize and adapt begin.
While I'm sitting in the studio today, I thought I'd take a minute to talk to you about SAFe Studio, a game-changing platform for learning and practicing SAFe, no matter where you are in your SAFe journey. Picture this, your team streamlined like never before with common self-paced learning and the right assets at the right time, all at their fingertips. SAFe Studio isn't just a tool, it's a breakthrough in aligning your team's effort with your big picture goals. And we've all been there. You go to a training class and you leave with all this energy and great ideas, but you get back to your desk on Monday and you're a little bit lost about how to apply all of that great content to your context. Well, SAFe Studio helps you avoid that ambiguity by providing clarity, efficiency, and most importantly, resources to help you hit the ground running in your new way of working. But SAFe Studio doesn't stop there. You'll also find tools to connect to the greater Scaled Agile community, simplified course management in the virtual classroom, access to all of our platforms like piplanning.io, comparative agility, and others. You'll find templates to facilitate product development activities and SAFe events, along with toolkits, video tutorials, and good gracious, so much more. Check out SAFe Studio today and see for yourself at safe.scaledagile.com. Now, back to the show.
You know, there's a lot of people that consume our content, and I hope that they can really start to understand the level of thought and consideration that goes into not just the article structure, but every word that's on the page. I mean, I've gone through framework reviews, and I don't think people can really appreciate the level of scrutiny and careful, thoughtful consideration that goes into all of it. And this evolution of how things are written it's not been easy for us, right? I mean, it's been It's, I'm sure, hard for the team to let go of certain words and certain structures and things that were well considered, but I think the output is something that's going to be much easier for a lot of folks. So that's a massive victory. I kind of want to pivot now to the other big change that we reviewed, which was the reimagined big picture, right? And I think it's important to note for consideration that nothing's come out, right? We haven't stripped anything out of the framework, and all the other configurations are still available. But what we lead with has changed quite a lot.
Yeah, and in terms of just the amount of change, if you look at the full configuration, you mentioned the configurations, Adam, I think it has around 105, 110 icons. Someone can check that and see if I remember that correctly. This new big picture has about 47 icons. And, the listeners know that these icons represent areas that you can click to access further information. So in terms of density of information, it's about half of what it was. But one of the things we were trying to do with this big picture was present that information in a way that was significantly different from the way that we presented it previously. And I mentioned at the beginning when we started talking that I think the mission we were on before was this idea of optimizing for completeness, creating a big picture that had a surface area for whatever guidance you need. Now, people still need that depth. If you're a SAFe professional, an SPC, an SPCT, and you're out there implementing, you need that depth of guidance. But I wanted to take the big picture back to what I think was its original intent, which was an intuitive communication device to show organizations, leaders, and whoever needed the information SAFe in the whole in terms of how does the integrated system fit together. So one of the big differences you'll see on this big picture is it's built around storylines, critical storylines like portfolio flow, storylines like how do we go from product innovation to delivering business value. And you'll also recognize that we've started to place the icons, the events, the roles, the activities in situ, so that there's no work to be done to formulate the process in your mind. As you look at the big picture, you intuit more easily exactly the story that it's trying to tell. So it's quite a different way of thinking about it. And of course, it's driven by feedback in a large part. We're trying to be very customer-centric with this new representation. We want to create something that we can put in someone, whether you're doing a training engagement, a consultancy engagement, whether you're doing a lunch and learn session, and they can look at the big picture and they can take away an understanding of, even if I don't know every single icon or every single role, I understand the purpose that this big picture is trying to help us achieve. And that's the big difference in how we're thinking about it as well.
I'm really excited that we've elevated the concept of story. I think as consultants, that's such an important tool to help communicate ideas. And I think it's also a lost art. And we do talk about storytelling within the product body of knowledge that we have. And I'm really excited to see that elevated beyond that, because it's so much more important than just using story to articulate product needs and desires. As people, and I think as we become a more AI-focused people, the idea of communicating well and in impactful ways is probably more important than ever. And I do want to give an acknowledgement too to our director of brand, Tim Schisler, who just wrapped up a really amazing talk and presentation about the art of storytelling. And I encourage people to go onto the community platform, and hopefully by the time you hear this, it's available, and check out Tim's presentation, because it really is an art. And, we talk a lot about story arcs and how you can structure information to tell a good story. But what Tim has shown us, as we have a new focus on storylines, is really a compelling way to articulate a story in an engaging fashion, no matter what the story may be. So I think that's a really, really exciting thing. With the new BP, I think for a lot of people coming in, and I know you and I have both presented the BP for the first time to clients, and the response is common. There's a gasp, because it is a lot. And I think the new focus on what really matters, as well as the second tab, which is the core competencies, is a really good direction to help people understand what we're doing on that first image, and then through the core competencies, why and how we're going to accomplish it on that core competencies tab.
Yeah, and if you think back, there's a couple of things you mentioned there that are really important. The storytelling one, spot on in terms of how important these are. Think about when we're in class, Adam, and we're doing a training or some kind of engagement. The first thing people ask is, can you give us an example? Can you bring to life the concept that you're telling through some kind of example? That's what I want to jump off the page when people look at the new big picture. And Tim has been a great help to me and the team also in making these storylines really come to life. And it reminded me just very quickly, the session we had on Monday that you led with the SPCTs, Rebecca was doing an exercise in the morning around asking them to share some stories using this big picture, the new big picture as a backdrop. And what was so satisfying about that is they were illuminating storylines that weren't necessarily the prime storylines that I'd set them up with, but other storylines that this new big picture was enabling. And that was wonderful to see. To go back to your final comment about the balance between the configurations and the big picture. And the reason we called it the big picture is it was meant to be just that. It was meant to be a way of consuming at a high level the real purpose behind the drive to adopt this new way of working. So it's a way of stepping back and looking at the big picture. And that's what we've tried to reinstantiate. Now, you mentioned that the existing configurations remain on the Scaled Agile Framework website. Those are critical for people who need to double click in. And we're going to explore over the next few months, leading up to the next SAFe Summit, what is the right way to expose that double click? Is it through configurations, or is there some other means that you might surface that information? But I certainly don't want anyone to fear that for those that are really out there implementing the details of SAFe, that there'll be any loss in terms of that information and guidance. It will still be there. But this big picture is going to allow people to have conversations. I've already had conversations this week, Adam, here at the SAFe Summit. People saying to me, one quote that I loved was, with this new big picture, I feel that I've got something now I can put in front of my CEO and really explain to him all the key work that we're doing around SAFe, and he's going to understand exactly what I'm talking about, which was so satisfying to hear.
Sure. I mean, that's the whole goal, right? I mean, you want to be able to very quickly and with clarity and in concise words explain what we're doing and why. And I think the new BP really supports that. So it's exciting. So you mentioned kind of the future and the different things that we're working on. We never stop, right? We've been working on the BP and all of the framework content and all of the supporting content and platforms for a lot of years. And I remember very clearly when SAFe 5.0 launched, Dean making the statement that SAFe 5 is cool, but I'm really excited for SAFe 8. And we're not there yet. And I think it's also important to note that with this new visualization, there's no iteration in the framework. We're still working on SAFe 6 guidance and SAFe 6 content, but we're not done. So as we start looking towards the future and we start thinking about comprehension, the IP isn't done, right? So as we start looking forward to 2025, what are some of the things that you and the team are really excited about?
Anytime that you want to think about how you innovate, you've got to think about what mechanisms you have available to bring innovation to market at a pace that also is respectful of the speed that customers want to consume it. And the reason I say that, Adam, is, when we look at the framework, I see the framework now represented by this new big picture as fairly persistent. It's the operating model, and of course it does change, but generally it's a set of proven practices that persist in nature. At the other end of the spectrum, new articles. We need the ability to release new articles and new areas of IP on a much more regular basis, maybe monthly or every couple of months. So one of the things we're thinking deeply about at the moment is how do we separate these two things? How do we create and maintain the operating model? But how do we create a deep, deep knowledge base of guidance that can continue to evolve at a regular pace? And one of the things I shared in my keynote that I think is helping us to think about what the near future might look like, is the lens of the core competencies. SAFe has always spoken about core competencies as the skills, the behaviors, the knowledge needed to really excel and thrive in the digital age and help to build the future. And these core competencies, things like agile product delivery, team and technical agility, lean portfolio management, they're really starting to feel some pressure from new emerging ways of working. We've seen huge developments in the product space. A lot of organizations are asking themselves, how do we take a product-centric approach? What does a product operating model look like? There's lots of exciting work we can do in addition to the new product innovation article that we just launched around that agile product delivery core competency. I'm seeing some really exciting patterns in the team space that are really challenging the notion of long-lived teams. I'm seeing some organizations bring together people more dynamically to solve problems and then reform them to solve the next problem. And I'm seeing a return also to some of the roots of Agile around Agile engineering and how do we create a truly productive environment for our people and our teams. And then, of course, things like AI. New technologies, when they come along, sometimes have the ability to disrupt every single competency in the way that we think about the skills, the knowledge that we need to be proficient in our roles. So the next big area that we're exploring is to answer the question, what are those core competencies needed for organizations to really build the future? And if I could just add one more thing just very quickly to that, The other realization I think that we've had, and you've seen this, Adam, when you've been working with customers, is there's a desire these days for organizations to own their own way of working. And it makes perfect sense. It comes back to that question of context. And when you start to own your own way of working, it means that your journey might look different from another organization. I think there's a great opportunity as we think about the future of SAFe to imagine different ways to navigate through the framework. Maybe one organization wants to start at the team level. Maybe they want to launch an art. Maybe another organization wants to start at the portfolio level. Maybe one wants to start by rolling out a more product-centric approach. And my vision is that we can create a framework that has this level of adaptability to really allow organizations to navigate through it in a way that makes most sense for their challenges. So a lot of exciting stuff happening. And I'm hoping as we start to converge the research and ideas around this, that we'll have the opportunity at the next SAFe Summit to share where this thinking has taken us.
You know, Andrew, what you just described it reminds me of the very first lesson I learned in consulting a lot of years ago. I was working with Steve Davis. He had founded Davis Base at the time. And the lesson he told me was, you know, Adam, you know a lot, you've done a lot. The one thing that I ask you to always remember is to meet the client where they're at, right? There's no one path for everybody. There's no single solution for everybody. The best thing we can do for a client is to understand where they're at, what they hope to achieve through going through this journey together, and then together plot the best path to that journey. And I think what you're describing is exactly that, right? So through fast-paced transformation at a broad scope, it was important to have a repeatable pattern for organizations to follow that gives some assurance of success. And I think it's important in our market to understand that organizations have been transforming for a long time. There's organizations that are represented here today that have been working with SAFe for, in some cases, 8 or 10 years. And we'd be remiss to not acknowledge that, right? So if we go into those organizations and we continue to talk about transformation, we need to be careful to not insult the hard work that they've done, which is why I think this path-based approach, the storytelling, the multiple paths in is so important. Because if we walk into a client that's been working in our way, in this way for a lot of years, the question can be, instead of train everyone, launch trains, where would you like to see the most improvement and the most advancement? And you did mention product delivery. And I think personally, I grew up in a product background. I learned product from some amazingly talented people in the consumer product space. And that's always what I go back to. And as we talk a lot about product operating models and those things today, what I'm reminded is that the discipline of product development and product management is far older than anything we've ever done in IT. We've been building products for a long time, and that body of knowledge and those patterns are well established. And I think we do a good job in SAFe and through a lot of the work that Luke and others have done to capture those things. There's a very powerful toolkit. So by giving people the opportunity to say, hey, we're really interested in improving our product practices and having a starting point for organizations to begin their journey there, I think it's a really powerful thing. And it gives us the flexibility to adjust paths in based on the latest market conditions and trends. So if a year from now, there's a mass consolidation in AI, and we're really focused on how do we operationalize AI effectively across the organization, well, maybe that's a starting point, right? Maybe somebody signs with Microsoft and they're really focused on Copilot and how to best deploy that. And we can offer guidance for organizations that are doing that for how best to apply that in a SAFe context, across roles, across different operating layers. So I think that path forward is really genius. I think it gives us an infinite level of flexibility as we look towards the future, especially for organizations that maybe have already done a lot of transformation work and are really focused on the back end of the implementation roadmap, which is sustain and relentless improvement.
Yeah, and actually, you and I had a great conversation the other day, Adam, and it was around the word transformation itself. And, I've heard from customers as well, we don't want to be transformed. We don't want this to be something done to us. And we also don't want to think about it as something that starts and ends. The transformation is complete. The language people are using now is we're on this continuous journey of improvement. And the ability to adapt the framework has always been there. You mentioned, the work you used to do as a consultant, and other partners have done wonderful work helping organizations adapt the framework to their needs. But what we're trying to do now is, rather than make it something that you have to somewhat work out or discover or find out for yourself. We want to make it part of the fabric of the framework. The framework is going to be built to be adaptable to context. It's going to be extensible in the way that it's designed. It's going to talk about different entry points. It's going to talk about the ability, just as you said, Adam, to recognize where you're starting from and think carefully about where you need to go next. So I think it's always been there for those that are comfortable and know the framework really well. Like with everything we've been talking about this week, it's about raising that level of clarity and not making it hard for people to intuit that that is the purpose of the framework itself. So I'm excited. And also something you touched on, when we think about what it means to continue to evolve the framework, we've got to be cognizant that the competencies of the future, some of them we might be able to discern. Others, we have no idea what they're going to be at this moment. And they're going to land at some point, and we're going to have to make sure we can incorporate that in a way that is meaningful. So that's why I come back to this duality of the fact there's an operating model. It's well known. It's the framework. It's represented by the big picture. And then there needs to be this way to continually allow the knowledge base and these competencies to evolve, expand, and be cognizant of whatever is the most important problem that organizations are trying to solve. And we're trying to make sure that we can do both of those things. So we can be flexible and adaptive, but also provide some assurity that at the heart of SAFe is this set of integrated proven practices. Because one of the questions that we get most often is, show us someone who's done this before. We want to see someone in our industry, someone we can relate to really give us the assurance before we get started on this journey. So we're trying to balance both of those needs.
Yeah, and to kind of wrap things up here, Andrew, I do want to mention as well that, so the IP and the guidance is a significant component of what we do. But then we also have the responsibility to develop the skills to help people be successful with the framework. And that's why I'm really excited about, the long-awaited delivery of the advanced SPC learning paths and credential that we started discussing this week as well. And I think it's essentially a never-ending opportunity for us to identify the critical skills that our SPCs and people working in our context need, and then to develop those skills in a multimodal and also validated way. So as we start bringing new IP to market, there'll be more to it than just, here, do an upgrade and now you're all set. Like with LPM, for example, you might understand LPM context. Now let's help you develop the skills that you need to help others embrace LPM or products or, quite honestly, anything on the big picture. So I'm really excited for the path that we're taking to help develop additional skills and competency with the professionals who have trusted us, quite honestly, with their careers.
Yeah, the framework exists primarily as written word. The articles range between 2,000 and 3,000 words, and we've supplemented them now with videos, but the learning is what brings the guidance to life. And I think what was nice this week, Chris spoke about it in his opening comments, is recognizing that not only are we reimagining the framework, but we're reimagining how we're providing that learning and how we're offering it. Because people are learning differently. They want to learn in the flow of work. They want to get immediate answers to questions. So on one end of the spectrum, you have things like SAFe Copilot. How do I do this? I'm about to run a PI planning event. I'm a Scrum Master. What do I need to do in the team breakouts? And then, like you said, Adam, other key topics. I need to know more about OKRs. That's a skill I want to develop. I want to know how to write features successfully. And then you mentioned those advanced paths. I want to actually continue to develop my skills as an SPC. What else do I need to learn to be proficient in that particular role? So it's been really exciting this week to start to see all that connectivity from how the framework is being reimagined, how the storylines are emerging, and then how those storylines are being brought to life through the different learning products and the opportunities for people to engage in different ways.
Andrew, when I think back over the last several months, it's been tiring. When we think about day-to-day at work at Scaled Agile, we've really rallied the team to do some incredible things. And when you come to an event like we're sitting at right now, and you see all of that come to life, and you feel the excitement of the people who are on the receiving end, it really does make things worthwhile. And I think day to day, just like anybody in any context, it's easy to get bogged down in the tyranny of the urgent, the most important thing of the moment. But to see it all come together, an event like we're sitting at now, it's really special. And I got to say, just to kind of close things out, I'm really excited for where we're going.
It's very humbling to be at an event like this, honestly, Adam. I'm incredibly excited. And honestly, the thing that we are most fortunate to have above everything else is such a wonderful network of customers, partners, organizations who are happy to test new ideas, provide feedback. They help us know we're on the right path, but critically, they help us know when we're on the wrong path. And we couldn't have achieved any of the things that we shared this week without having that ability to really connect deeply with our customers. And it's been wonderful to be able to finally share some of the work we've been doing to hopefully help them solve their problems even easier.
Andrew, with gratitude to everyone here in the Framework team and others, thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Adam.
Talk soon.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like what you hear, please refer us to your friends and colleagues and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. See you next time.